I'm back here on Broken and Healed with Dr. Jay Bernstein, who is a board certified emergency medicine specialist. He completed medical school at the University of Massachusetts in 1994 and residency in emergency medicine at Boston University in 1999. He also completed a fellowship in occupational and environmental medicine from the University of Cincinnati in 2011. Dr. Bernstein has a master's degree in public health as well as a master's degree in healthcare administration. He has over 20 years' experience in emergency medicine, and he is a retired major after serving 21 years in the U.S. Army. Thanks for being with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited about today's episode because it's a topic that I think deserves more and more attention as we go along because we are sailing into, have sailed into really a crisis. So I'd like to jump right in. We're going to be talking about autism today in this first episode. And thank you for being here. And I'm so grateful that you've actually taken the time out of your career, your other career, which is emergency medicine, to dive into this subject and really get deep into the data.
Okay, yeah, well, autism is becoming more prevalent. I think everybody knows that by now. And we really need to look at exactly why, but the first step is really to understand the magnitude of the problem. And we're at the point now where basically, according to the CDC, about 1 in 31, at least this is as of 2022, that 1 in 31 children in America have some form of autism spectrum disorder. If you look at the data from the um, the U.S. Census Bureau, you may get a slightly lower number, like maybe 1 in 50. If you look at the special education child count data from the U.S. Department of Education, it's around the same as 1 in 50. If you look at the Medicaid data, that's closer to the CDC data, which is about 1 in 30. So yeah, so it's a pretty significant problem depending on what data set you look at, whether it's 1 in 30, 1 in 50. It's a big number. Um,
I will jump in and say that there is data that I've seen that we've seen that shows states like California have higher rates. 1 in 26 was the last number that I've seen, which suggests that there may be a relationship between the things that a child might be asked to take, ingest, have. There might be an environmental factor that is at an increase in a state like California as opposed to another state, which is sort of just an interesting piece of data.
right, yeah, so you can look at it by look by area, geographical area. And another way to look at it is look at age group. So there was a study that was published 2022. The study was called Autism Diagnosis Among U.S. Children and Adults by Grosvenor and colleagues. And they did a cross-sectional study looking at children and adults, various ages of autism spectrum disorder rates from 2011 up to through 2022. And they looked at over 12 million health records in the US. And they found a pretty significant increase in in all groups, but the biggest group that was affected is the group 0 to 4 years of age. That group from 2011 to 2022 went up by 352%. So, and in general, the pattern in the study was that as the age gets younger, the the incidence of autism spectrum disorder is increasing more rapidly. So, so not as affecting geographical area, it's actually now affecting the younger children more. So the big question is why?
And what could that be about? What could it be about that younger children are affected at a dramatically higher rate, in your opinion?
Well, that's a great question. We know that back in 1970, even Trump mentioned this, that the baseline was about 1 in 10,000 in this country. And then it started to go up to about 1 in 1,000 in 1995, and it started to go up from there. Um, but right around sort of between that time, around 1988, they increased the vaccine schedule in terms of the number of vaccines. It went up fairly dramatically. In 1962, they had three vaccines with a total of five doses. 1983, they had four vaccines with 24 doses. And then after that time, there was a which may be significant. There was in 1986 there was some legislation passed. You may know a little bit more about that than I do, which is the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. But after that is when we saw the real steep increase in vaccines. And by 2023, there were a total of 16 vaccines being given in 88 doses, um, you know, all the way up, basically until people reach into their 20s. Um, what do you
Yeah.
think? Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's no I think it's no coincidence because as you know, my history and what I how I got into this terrain, if you will, is I had a severe vaccine injury. I actually had two vaccines 2 years apart, neither of which I needed. But that's a whole other story, and I wrote a book about it. But I ended up with bedridden for 3 years with severe mercury poisoning. I had mercury induced dementia, but I also had incredibly, inhumanely high levels of aluminum in my brain, which I spent many years chelating, both the mercury and the aluminum, which is what enabled me to heal my brain. And, it seems like, well, first of all, the 1986 Vaccine Act is really, really significant because if somebody like me who's an adult, not that this proves, the entire sort of scientific paradigm, but I had a fully functioning nervous system and brain, and I took those two doses 2 years apart with whatever levels of mercury and aluminum were in those two vaccines. So I'm just, wondering your thoughts because we go from in 1962, we go from three vaccines with whatever levels of mercury and aluminum. And do we know if there was mercury and aluminum in those early vaccines? Is that data available?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, what people need to also realize when we talk about vaccines, you know, the I think that what comes to mind when from the doctor point of view is giving an immune molecule that creates this immune reaction so that it's an antigen of some sort, various types. It's a live attenuated virus and a killed virus or a protein. And then we inject that into people and they get an immune response. And what does that have to do with autism? What does that have to do with aluminum or mercury? Well, the answer is that in all the vaccines, there's something called an excipient. An excipient is something else that's not actually the antigen that's causing the immune reaction is for other purposes. There are many other purposes of about sort of six or seven categories. For example, like a preservative. Mercury is in the form of ethyl mercury, which is called thimerosal. That is in there as a preservative. But if the vaccine was given as a single dose vial, you wouldn't need a preservative because it can make it sterile. And in fact, that's what we see when in the influenza vaccine is that the multi-dose vials are generally thimerosal, and the single-dose vaccine vials usually don't have a preservative free. That does not have the mercury or the thimerosal. Other excipients there's another thing called an adjuvant, and the adjuvant helps theoretically helps the immune or response and occur more in a robust fashion. And then add the classic adjuvant is aluminum. The problem with that is that, and we can look at that study in another discussion, but there's a few studies, but one really good, well done study looked at the history of this aluminum adjuvant that started in the 1930s, so even before that, actually, on animals, and it's really never been proven out over time. I mean, we still consider it this adjuvant theory from the early 1900s to be something that we are relying upon, and many people believe it. But if you look at the actual data of the scientific data in the literature, It's really there's really no good evidence for it. Um, so that's another excipient, and there are other molecules in these vaccines that for the purpose of being a stabilizer. There's some that you find cell culture material. You have inactive ingredients, and antibiotics are in there. Polysorbate 80 is something that's in some of the vaccines that increases the blood-brain barrier, the permeability. It increases the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. Um, you find this formaldehyde. There's a number of human toxins in these in all of them. If anybody wants to look them up too, if you go to there's an FDA document called Appendix B, and it's titled Vaccine Excipient Summary, and it has all the excipients of all the vaccines that are used in the marketplace now. And that's where the problems arise from. And that's when we have the problem with aluminum and mercury, it's from the excipients.
Is it a fact that aluminum and mercury are unsafe for the human body and potentially cause neurodegenerative diseases? Is it a fact that those two excipients or adjuvants are an unhealthy variable to be adding to a human body and most specifically a developing brain? Would you say like that's a fact?
Uh, it's a fact that these toxins are in the vaccines, and it's a fact that these are neurotoxins, aluminum and mercury in particular are neurotoxins. And there's no reason, not only there's no reason in terms of biological plausibility or just theoretically, there's no reason to think that they would be not affecting the human brain, but there's a lot of evidence that shows, in fact, it is affecting the human brain. Ethyl mercury, which is thimerosal, is the form of mercury that's lipid soluble. So in other words, there are there are three categories of mercury that you find out there. There's the salt, which is also called the ionic form, and there's the metallic form. Those are soluble in water. So if you have a glass of say oil and water, everybody knows they separate, right? So the ionic or the metallic mercury would go into the water part of it. The if you have the organic form of mercury, which is lipid soluble, it'll preferentially go into the oil. It'll stay in the oil. So it wants to be in oil. So so there's methyl mercury and ethyl mercury. The methyl mercury is one organic type that's in fish. So for example, when various types of chemical plants may spill some of their chemicals into the ocean, or even in fresh water as well, what happens is the microorganisms convert that to an organic form, which is a fat soluble form. And same thing happens when coal plants emit coal, they emit metallic mercury. It gets changed in the atmosphere to the ionic form. You get that soluble in water. It comes down with the rain, gets in the water, and then the microorganisms in the water, in fresh and salt water, convert it to an organic form, which is called methyl mercury. And methyl mercury doesn't want to be in the water; it wants to be in a fat. So when a fish swims by, that mercury goes into the fish and stays in the fish for the life of the fish because the fish has fat. It wants to be in fat. It'll stay in so when that fish lives its life, it accumulates mercury, the organic form, and it's called bioaccumulation. And then when one fish will eat another fish, and there are many fish that are predator fish like salmon, tuna, these are predator fish. So they eat other fish, and the all the fish that fish accumulated in their body throughout its life in terms of the organic mercury. That now goes into the other fish that ate it, and that's called biomagnification. And some fish the larger fish who are predator fish can have like a million-fold increased mercury in the fat in the fish, and then their meat, which is fatty, and the skin and the meat, compared to the water it swims in. So that's methyl mercury, and ethyl mercury, which is which is thimerosal, is even more lipid soluble. It's much more lipid soluble. So when you inject this lipid soluble neurotoxin into uh, anyone, it preferentially goes into the places where there's fat, and of course, there's a lot of fat in the brain. In fact, as in fetuses, that's the most lipid rich part of a pregnant woman. So if a pregnant woman gets a mercury-containing vaccine, it'll go preferentially right into the brain of the fetus, which is a developing brain. And also, it's same thing with, when after delivery, you have an infant, a newborn, an infant, and then later a child. As that child develops, it's the fat content of the brain gets less and less. So it's much more rich in lipid or fat when it's younger. So a younger brain is much more susceptible to the negative effects of this organic mercury because it accumulates there more, concentrates there, and it's as you said, it's a developing brain. And then when it comes to aluminum needs a permeable, open blood-brain barrier. Now the organic mercury can go right through it because it's a lipid layer. It goes right into the brain. It goes through the placenta into the brain for a pregnant woman as well. But even aluminum that's not lipid soluble, if a little baby, especially a premature baby, it goes right into the brain because the permeability of the blood-brain barrier is not very good, so the aluminum can get in there as well. So there's definitely a lot of biologic plausibility that these substances in the vaccines can cause neurologic problems. There's no question. And then, hopefully we'll do some other discussions regarding looking at the literature, actually finding that there's actually scientific evidence that shows that.
Yeah, well, I mean, this brings me to kind of the end of this episode and the beginning of the next, because I feel like whenever these conversations come up, especially when you have quote unquote scientists or quote unquote doctors or medical professionals who are being asked these questions, they're like being asked, or even pediatricians, the answer that comes up seems to be this sort of almost like a buzzword sentence that has lost its meaning, and they will often say correlation doesn't mean causation. And that sentence seems to stop the intellectual debate in its tracks. Suddenly, nobody can move forward. And so, we're going to tackle that in the next episode. And please stay tuned.
All right.